The National Prosecuting Authority is once again facing a barrage of criticism, with questions being asked about its efficiency, effectiveness, and especially its ability to handle high-profile and at times complex criminal cases. The Free State Division of the High Court, its decision this week to order a stop to the prosecution of Morwadi Cholota, one of former Premier Ace Magashule's co-accused in the so-called asbestos trial, is but the latest in a string of shocking outcomes that have put the prosecution's body under pressure. Judge Philip Lobsa based his decision on his finding that Cholota's extradition from the United States was done unlawfully, stripping the court of jurisdiction to try her on the offences charged. That outcome joins a growing list of failed or stalled prosecutions, from the 280 million rand fraud, corruption and money laundering case related to the Estina Dairy project, to the discharge of the accused in the other Gupta-linked matter of New Lane involving money laundering charges to the tune of some 25 million rand. Then came the controversial acquittal of televangelist Timothy Omotosho on 32 charges, including rape, racketeering, and human trafficking, not to mention the attempts to extradite fugitives, the Guptas and Shepard and Mary Bushiri, back to the country to face justice, which efforts seem to be going nowhere slowly. So let's unpack all of these critical issues. I'm joined now by Dr. Jean Redpath, senior researcher from the Dula Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape. Before we pick up that conversation, let's take a listen to this clip.
Things rather sadly appear to be falling apart. It's not only the big cases upon which the eyes of the country are focused, hoping rather forlornly for accountability to be demonstrated, but they are failing to prosecute with any kind of conviction. Now, once again, in the last few days, the NPA has lost an important cog in a state capture case, most recently by failing to follow the correct process to extradite former Free State Premier Ace Magashule's ex-personal assistant, Morwadi Cholota. The problem appears to be that the NPA, in the form of the Director of Public Prosecutions of the Free State, applied for the extradition, and not the Minister of Justice, which is the correct route. We have requested the Justice Committee Chair to call the Minister, the Department of Justice and the NPA to be brought before the committee to again explain this problem. But these mistakes keep happening now with monotonous regularity, which leads to a broader failure of the NPA to successfully prosecute large-scale corruption cases. Not a single politically connected person has yet been imprisoned as a result of state capture. Here are other examples of other failures. The Transnet corruption case, insufficient evidence presented, and there was an acquittal. New Lane Investments, NPA failed to establish a prima facie case, made horrendous procedural errors, which the judge described as a comedy of errors. Zizi Kadwa, the matter is withdrawn by the NPA.
So that was the DA's Glynis Breitenbach there giving an update and their assessment of the state of play as far as the effectiveness and efficiency of the National Prosecuting Authority is concerned. So let's take the conversation forward then. I'm joined by Dr. Jean Redpath, as I said, from the Dula Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape. Doc, good afternoon. You've done a bit of work looking at the workings of the NPA. We see these high-profile cases, and I listed them in my intro, and Glynis Breitenbach also speaks to some of them. To what extent are they emblematic of what your research has found in terms of the state of the NPA, its efficiency and effectiveness?
Certainly what we've seen over the last 15 years, and especially during the 10 years of state capture, is a deterioration in the efficiency and effectiveness of the NPA. The legislation that provides the institutional framework for the NPA did not protect it from the state capture years. And what we've seen is that the framework has also resulted in the NPA not being able to have the skills it needs for serious and complex crimes such as the New Lane case and other such matters. So it is very clear that there has been a deterioration in performance. The NPA has also tended to prosecute in the past only matters which have a very high probability of success, and that's around a 95% rate, because that is the conviction rate that they advertise. But with high-profile matters, it's simply not possible for them to decide not to prosecute. There would be a public outcry. And so these cases are much more difficult than what the NPA has been used to prosecuting over the last 10 to 15 years. Unfortunately, the legislation doesn't give them the direct ability to hire in specialist legal counsel, specialist forensic investigators. The provision in the law says they have to go through the Minister, Director General of Justice, and the Minister of Finance, which is a very cumbersome and bureaucratic provision. There also isn't a budget for that hiring in of additional skills. And so Advocate Victoria herself has been calling for a new legislative framework which would free the NPA to make those kinds of appointments. And although the previous Minister of Justice, Ronald Lamola, undertook to ensure that would happen, he is no longer the Minister of Justice. I believe the current Minister of Justice, in a late-night interview on SABC, said she was looking toward that legislation, but it seems to have fallen off the radar. And we need to put it back on the agenda. The NPA in its current form and shape is not going to succeed in the way that we need to have it succeed.
So, Doc, you talk about current form and shape, and earlier on I heard you talking about the level of skills, availability or otherwise, to prosecute complex cases. In weighing up the balance of factors that account for some of the outcomes we've seen recently, how much of that is accounted for by top leadership in the form of the National Director of Public Prosecutions and perhaps her team of leadership? Because you will have heard the calls that are saying she must resign or she must leave office because she's just been not able to live up to expectations in that position. To what extent does that account for what we are seeing versus the factors you just listed, legislative framework, the issues of skills within the organization?
So that's a very important and interesting question. The National Director only has the power to intervene when policy and practice directions are not followed. And the power actually to manage cases and to run them properly and appropriately rests with the directors of public prosecutions in the divisions, which we would call provinces. So it's the relevant DPP in the province who really has the job of shepherding such cases through appropriately, making sure that the right people are appointed. So it's that layer of people who's actually quite crucial in how these matters have gone through the courts. And here in particular, we would want them to appoint the right people to prosecute those cases. For example, the Omatosa case was not prosecuted by an experienced sexual offences prosecutor. Why was it allocated to someone who was not an experienced sexual offences prosecutor? These are the kinds of things that the DPP should be on top of and should be shepherding and managing. The other problem is the DPPs serve for much longer than the NDPP. The NDPP serves for either 10 years or until they reach age 65. The DPP, whatever age they are appointed, serves until age 65. And we have some DPPs who have been in their positions for these 10 to 15 years where we've seen a failure, and they are still there. And there's no mechanism for them to easily be removed unless there's something clear to point to. Yeah. And in fact, one of those DPPs, the Advocate Victoria, has asked the President to remove, and there's been no movement on that at all. And so the legislative framework, we keep returning to the legislative framework as being part of the problem.
All right, I've got to leave it there for this afternoon, but thank you for those insights. That's Dr. Jean Redpath, who is a senior researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute, and that is at the University of the Western Cape.